One gay stood near the window and watched the people talking and laughing in the crowded room. They looked like any concentration of smart set members one might encounter in any corner of the civilized globe, and if the women had a rather more exotic air than the women of London's Mayfair, or even fashionable Paris, their clothes and their hairstyles were copied slavishly from the West. As for their jewelry, Gay had long ago decided that most Western women, unrelated to a millionaire, would prefer to think of it in the security of bank vaults. But these sinuous creatures with their oblique glances, and their teeth like blanched almonds, positively scintillated with diamonds, and although the occasion was only a well-attended cocktail party in the house of Orhan Bey, the temptation to outdo one another had obviously been well played up too. The men were dark-eyed and exciting, if one found dark-eyed men exciting. One or two of them were young officers on leave from local units, and their uniforms were very smart. They filled the air with the fragrance of Turkish cigarettes, disposed of as many martinis as were offered them, and had an eye for a neatly turned ankle, and a brilliantly reddened mouth, in the way of their counterparts in most European capitals. And although Istanbul is no longer a capital, it is a modern city that prides itself on its modernity. Gay watched Orhan Bey, after making himself attentive to a group of elderly ladies, wending his way amongst the crush until he reached a similar group of elderly men, sitting round a coffee table and drinking heavily sweetened Turkish coffee. As she saw him sink down in the lap of a huge Chesterfield and become one of them, she decided that now was the moment when she might slip outside. At this hour of the evening her head always ached a little, and outside the nightingales would be singing in a thicket at the corner of one of the big lawns, and it would be cool and sweet-scented, and the murmur of the Sea of Marmara would reach her pleasantly. Under ordinary circumstances, the nearness of the Sea of Marmara would have been a constant delight to her, but as it was she only thought of it as a means of escape. She had no clear idea what lay on the other side of that sea, and she would have been appalled if she had known that only the vast continent of Asia spread itself between her and horizons undreamed of. But if it was escape, then it would mean a return to the world of normality, the world she had known, the world of women and girls who toiled for their living, and didn't live in the sumptuous lap of luxury from dawn till dusk, and dusk till dawn. Women and girls who traveled in tube trains, and caught buses at 5:30 each evening, and went home to cook themselves meals in little bedsitters. She herself had had a bedsitter once, but she couldn't recall exactly what it had looked like, or even where it was. She knew that she had possessed the key to it, and that it had overlooked some sort of a park, Battersea Park, and that the red buses had trundled past constantly. But when she tried to see it more clearly, its furnishings, the number on the front door of the house, painted on a fanlight, behind which a light glow, dimly at night, everything at once became a fog, and her head started to ache, and she felt frightened. "It's no use, my dear child," Orhan Bey would say in his kindly, cultured, sympathetic way. "It's no use trying to force things that are not ready to be forced. In time the mists will clear, but you will have to be patient." When the days and the weeks were creeping by, and she felt as if she was in a trap, a silk-lined trap, but a trap nevertheless. Tonight she had seen Charles Villiers, who had been introduced to her a week ago, for the second time, and 10 minutes ago he had slipped as unostentatiously as possible out of this same French window beside which she was standing, and she felt that she had to find him. If necessary she would search for him, for he was her own countryman, and surely if she appealed to him he would help her? She wasn't at all certain how he could help her, but he could listen to her, without Orhan Bey standing by and interjecting gently that she was a little overwrought, that she wasn't yet fully recovered. She bit her lip as the determination washed over her to make Charles Villiers listen to her, and then she was outside on the coolness of the lawn, feeling the crispness of the turf through her flimsy sandals. Her little black cocktail dress, which had arrived that afternoon from a very exclusive dressmaker, eddied as the night wind caught at it, and a pale slice of silvery moon, like a slice of watermelon, hanging in the violet darkness of the Istanbul sky, turned the cloud of soft fair hair on her shoulders to a cloud of silver gilt. She peered in the direction of the old coach house building, nowadays serving the purpose of a commodious modern garage, that reared itself up before her, and saw a line of cars glittering in the pale moon rays. She also thought she saw someone moving in the shadows of the coach house. Charles Villiers was not particularly tall, but he had a curious feline grace that made his movements distinctive, and somehow she knew she was not mistaken. A cigarette end glowed brightly for an instant, and then the someone behind it stabbed it out. or crushed it underfoot, and she had the impression that the movements were continuing across the lawn. Behind the coach house rose the miraculously slender minarets of the Blue Mosque, and its many cupolas, and they could hardly have looked lovelier etched against that warm eastern sky. Such a depth of color in a night sky Gay knew she had never seen in England, and even in moments such as this, when she was waiting for an opportunity that had to be seized, her artistic senses were soothed by it. A firm footstep crunched on the grass beside her, and a masculine voice asked quietly, "Looking for someone, Miss Maitland?" Gay realized that for once fate was on her side, and she answered without hesitation, or any attempt to dissemble. "Oh, yes, Mr. Villiers. I was looking for you." Charles Villiers didn't appear to be in the least surprised. He took her arm and guided her away from the lighted windows. "In that case, perhaps it would be better if we didn't stand about where the whole world can view us. Your guardian, and your guardian's guests, will have an excellent opportunity for arriving at wrong conclusions, unless we do something to prevent those conclusions from being arrived at. I want to talk to you, please." But of course," he said soothingly, as if it was an entirely natural thing that she should wish to talk to him. "The only problem is, where shall we go and talk? We could sit in the back of my car, but there again we might create a wrong impression if anyone sees us. Can you think of anywhere more private?" No, your car will do." She actually caught at his arm in her anxiety, and started to drag him away across the lawn. "I don't want to waste any time, and some of the others might be leaving soon. Where is your car? Is it one of these?" indicating the long line of glistening vehicles drawn up in the drive leading to the coach house. "No, it's just around the corner here." He led her to it, and she realized that he had probably been making certain it was safe, or doing something of the sort, when he vanished. Even in the pale starlight trickling through the branches of a tree beneath which it was standing, she could see that it was huge and expensive and glittering with chromium, the sort of car she had become used to driving in during the last 6 months. "Get in," he said, and she subsided onto the seat beside the driving seat. "Cold?" he asked, when he joined her, and realized that she was shivering a little, but he frowned as he put the question, for summer nights on the Bosporus are seldom cold, and tonight had struck him as peculiarly warm, even airless. She shook her head. "No, I suppose I'm nervous," she admitted, through teeth that were inclined to chatter. "Not frightened?" he asked, rather sharply. No, I don't think it's fright." Although she couldn't see it, his frown grew. "Have a cigarette," he suggested, and produced a fine platinum case and offered it to her. She could tell Hen was platinum by the way it flashed in the faint light of the dashboard that he had switched on, and the same light showed her his thin, dark, rather hawk-like face, turned towards her, the eyes, which she knew were as gray as wood smoke, watching her. "I don't normally smoke," she demurred. "Nevertheless, I think you'd better smoke now." He extracted a cigarette and lighted it for her and handed it to her. "Your nerves are to pieces tonight, Miss Mate 1 and 9Z." "I'm not Miss Maitland," she interrupted him hurriedly. "That's one thing I've got to tell you, Mr. Villiers. I'm not Cecile Maitland. I'm Gay Nicholson." He repeated the name deliberately. "Miss Nicholson. Oh, yes, of course I'm Miss." Her shaking fingers lowered the cigarette to the ashtray, and once again she turned to him and laid hold of his arm, and eyes that could have been very dark blue or even black, in that light, looked up at him imploringly. "No one believes me here, and that's why I had to talk to you. You're English, almost the only English person I've met since I came here, and it seemed to me that you must believe me. There would be no sense in my pretending I was Gay Nicholson if I was really Cecile Maitland, and it would strike you that way." "Yeah, why?" he demanded, very quietly. She made a helpless gesture with the hand that wasn't clutching at his sleeve. "Because, I suppose, we're both English." His firm mouth took on rather an odd expression. "You're placing rather a lot of confidence in the fact that we share the same nationality, but I suppose what you mean is that we look at things in the same way. We're logical. People like Orhan Bey can be logical, too, but their minds do work a little differently. They can be complex. It isn't so many years since their women wore veils, and naturally their attitude to women is not quite the same as ours." "That's it," she admitted, and licked her lips nervously. "It's like hurling yourself against a brick wall, trying to make an impression, to destroy a belief. Orhan Bey has smothered me with kindness for weeks now, but it's all a mistake. It's all a dreadful mistake, but I can't prove it. That's why I want you to help me." "A friend of Orhan Bey? Are you such a close friend of Orhan Bey?" she asked, and looked at him searchingly in the strange diffused light from the dashboard. Chapter 2. Before I answer you that question, Charles Villiers replied, looking at the tip of the cigarette that was smoldering between his fingers. Will you answer me one? Yes, of course, she answered, interlacing her own fingers so tightly that the nails dug into the soft flesh. What do you know about me apart from the fact that my name is Charles Villiers, and that I'm English? She looked faintly surprised. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Not even how long I've known Orhan Bey, or what I do for a living. Do you do anything for a living? Most men do. Even Orhan Bey, who is reputed to be a millionaire, has an office where he puts in an appearance for a few hours each day, and his secretary would probably tell you that during those few hours he works quite hard. He seemed to be looking at her, peculiarly, she thought, watching her so closely that she would have been embarrassed but for her agitation, which was quite genuine. Then I can take it that you don't even know I'm an archaeologist, and that I've been working out here for years now, although there are other corners of the world I visit occasionally. I've a summer villa on the Bosporus, and at the moment am in Istanbul because, well, it suits me to be in Istanbul. Do you still feel you can put more confidence in me than you can in Orhan Bey, who has treated you very well up till ho? Of course. Her eyes widened. Of course. Very Saul, if you weren't so plainly distressed I might feel flattered. Now go on and tell me of that you think I don't know. How much do you know? She asked, in a husky whisper. He shrugged his well-held shoulders slightly. I know what all the Bey's friends have been told, that you are the daughter of his English wife, who died recently, about 9 months ago, I should think, and that you flew out here to join him from England. I don't know what you were doing in England before you left, but I rather gathered you were still at school. His eyes bored into her face, while the Sea of Marmara lapped not far away. Someone switched on the wireless in the house they had left, and a crooner's voice floated out to them, and although they appeared to be in some green and isolated spot, a continuous, muted roar of traffic reached them all the time. You don't look very old to me, so that could easily be true. I'm 24, she told him, and I left school 7 years ago. Well, Cecile Maitland, no doubt, was in some sort of finishing school. Probably Orhan Bey paid her fees, but I don't believe he'd ever seen her. No. I wish he had, and she pressed her hands to her eyes as if she was at the end of her tether. Shall I go on? He asked, with sudden gentleness, or will you, please, she whispered. He lifted a light camel hair rug from the back of the seat, and placed it about her shoulders. I don't like to see you shivering, although I realize it's only nerves. Well, your plane crashed somewhere out over the Aegean, near the coast, and you were the only survivor. His hand pressed hers for an EE2S, EEIOKI, Iano instant, and she felt the lean, wiry strength of it. Sorry to have to mention that bit, but it's important. You were lay one down on the passenger list as Cecile Maitland. There was no other young English woman amongst the passengers whom you could possibly have been, and there was certainly no Gay Nicholson. Moreover, you answer to the description of Cecile Maitland. Almost laugh, ably so, if you'll forgive my saying so. If it's not true, your mother, or shall we say Orhan Bey's second wife, had described you so often, because she was proud of you, although strangely enough she never displayed a photograph of you. And how you're going to explain the similarity of very fair hair? I suppose some people would call it platinum, and Anglo-Saxon blue eyes, a model's proportions, and all the rest. I must admit I don't quite know, he repeated, with gentle emphasis. I don't quite know. Gay looked at him with almost tragic eyes. You think, like the rest, the doctors who attended, MNE, the nurses, Orhan Bey himself, that it was the shock of my experience that affected me, and that I'm suffering from a kind of amnesia that will pass one day. I'm physically completely fit again, and there's really copyright, nothing wrong with me, except that I don't know much about myself. But I tell you, with sudden fierceness, that I do know who I am. There are just 1 or 2 things that elude me. But any day now they'll fall into place, like the pieces of a jigsaw, and then I'll be able to prove that they've all been wrong. Will you? But the skepticism in his voice was almost like the last straw. Yes. Her small oval face gleamed pale as a pearl in the gloom, and her eyes were tormented. Already I know that I'm Gay Nicholson, and I know that I once lived in London. Remind me that Cecile Maitland lived 16 Torrance IE, in London, and it won't make any difference, because she didn't live in the part of London I lived in. I worked for my living. I think I used a typewriter. Lots of girls use typewriters, he told her smoothly. They do that sort of thing at school. Her hurt eyes rebuked him. ZL used a typewriter because I had to. Because I had to pay rent, and live, buy my clothes, and so forth. Then you didn't have any parents? I don't think so. But he could tell that there was doubt in the big eyes now. No, I'm almost certain I didn't because I know that I lived alone. It was a little room. I used to hear tugs hooting at night. Chelsea, it could have been, couldn't it? But as she turned to him eagerly, she realized that he was only humoring her. She fell back as if he had hit her. But I did live there, she insisted, almost sullenly. And I used to cook my own meals, collected shillings for a slot machine that controlled the electricity, and I went to places like cinemas and had my hair done every fortnight at a little place where, she shook her head, as if seeking desperately to clear it of the fog. And the night before I left London I had dinner with someone who said they would meet me in Istanbul. Yes, I know now. That's another bit that comes back to me. It was on. Ike. Now it was a man. TT usually is. With a coolness that was like an avalanche. No, you don't understand. Once again her eyes implored him. It was not any particular friend. It was not even someone I liked. In fact, full stop. In fact, as she put the tips of her fingers to her temples, and looked at him as he had once seen a dog look, when it was suffering, and ends on him desperately for help. T can't remember any more, and she gave a little whimper. Took here, my dear child, and he slid an arm about her slender shoulders, and gave her a quick hug. If this man with whom you had dinner the night before you left London, was to meet you in Istanbul, why have there been no inquiries about you? Why does the British Embassy know nothing about you? Why has no one come forward to make one single inquiry about a lovely young woman with blue eyes and fair hair, who is quite obviously English, and who calls herself Gay Nicholson? If you look at the thing passionately, doesn't it strike you that it must be because she doesn't exist? Yes, I suppose it does. It does seem fantastic, doesn't it? And she seemed to wilt in the crook of his arm. Look here, my dear. Voices were reaching them across the lawns, and it was quite obvious that the cocktail party was breaking up. So he spoke hurriedly. I'm not disbelieving all you've told me just because you can't prove it, but now is not the time to go into the matter. Will you meet me somewhere tomorrow? Are you allowed to go out and around by yourself? She looked up at him vaguely. Yes, I can have a car. Then meet me at that new hotel called the Commodore. It's one that was opened recently, and has every modern inconvenience, as well as an outside swimming pool. I believe it's an American-owned place, and is becoming very popular, so it won't look in the least odd RS if we meet there. After all, you're an extremely attractive type girl, and it's natural that I should wish to give you lunch. Say 1 o'clock. She still looked up at him vaguely, and then nodded her head, like a child receiving instructions about a Q lesson. Yes, I could manage that, but there's one thing I'd like to know. Why are you so desperately anxious to prove your identity? After all, he went on drily, you're living in the lap of luxury, and if it's true that you once collected shillings for an electric light meter, it must be a bit of a change. The Bey seems very devoted to his stepdaughter, and, on the whole, you don't have a bad time, do you? So why the sudden urgency to establish your identity? It isn't sudden. They could hear the Bey's voice, mellow and almost musical, floating across the lawn, and her nervousness returned. Also a sudden desperation crept into her manner. But I can't bear living like a bird in a gilded cage, and I want to be free. I want to be free to live my own life. I know I'm living a lie. Any other reason? He asked, reaching across her to open the door so that she could slip out. Cecile's mother agreed with the Bey about marriage plans for Cecile. There's a young man of whom they both approved, and he's coming here, very soon, this weekend. In fact, good enough, Charles Villiers said, and held open her door. Now try and make yourself as easy as possible, and re-enter the house by a side door. Chapter 3. When he saw her in broad daylight the next day, he was surprised because she looked like any other young woman keeping an appointment to have lunch with a man who desired her company. He didn't know what sort of dress allowance the Bey made her, or, indeed, why she should really wish to forfeit it, but her silk suit was plainly expensive, and it was a lupin blue shade that made her eyes look lupin blue also. They were extraordinarily clear eyes, but they were also shadowed. Her eyelashes were thick, and they glinted golden at the tips, and he thought her hair was the loveliest he had ever seen. There was very little wave in it, but it turned under slightly on her shoulders, and it was the color of a very pale primrose with the sun shining on it. He stood on the terrace steps of the Commodore and watched her carefully as she stepped from the Bey's car, and then crossed the forecourt to the foot of the steps. She moved with grace, as if she might at one time have been a model, he thought, and all her accessories set off her fairness. White handbag, white gloves, white shoes. No wonder the dark-eyed Turkish men turned to look at her as she quickened her footsteps neath the foot of the steps. I thought we'd have a drink on the terrace here, he said, after obeying a sudden impulse and running down the steps to meet her. The grateful look she flashed up at him because she wasn't to be left alone for even a short while touched him in some curious way. What is GSYRTPEAEN for your favorite tipple, as they say in bohemian circles? TD like a sherry, if you don't mind, of course. He sent her a slightly amused look as the EE approached. Have a grapefruit if you'd prefer. Oh, may I? She seized upon the suggestion eagerly. T really would prefer it. His amused look became more noticeable. You are rather wasted in your present setting, aren't you? You ought to be acquiring all sorts of expensive habits, and I quite thought you'd decided upon your favorite aperitif by this time. However, as he saw her face instantly cloud over, it just goes to prove that you can take a horse to the water, but you can't make it drink. In other words, you can transplant a rare flower 6 a harsh atmosphere and it will die. Or vice versa. She looked down into her grapefruit when it arrived. I think I should die if I had to live my present life indefinitely. And that proves I'm not a rare plant, doesn't it? Yet you look like one. She shook her head. I'm just ordinary. I feel it in my bones that I'm very ordinary. Charles Villiers smiled at her, and he had a very attractive, white-toothed smile. He was, she thought, peeping at him through her long eyelashes. A very attractive man. Some people might say a dangerously attractive man. Then why, when she had seen him on 2 occasions apart from this, hadn't she been aware of it before? And why, when she clung so freely to his arm the night before, had she been thinking of him only as a means of escape? 21. All at once she felt faintly horrified when she thought of the way she had made free with his arm, and the uninhibited manner in which she had accepted his invitation to enter his car. All right, Miss Thoroughly Ordinary Gay Nicola Son, and he paused as he uttered the name. We'll copyright accept it that there's nothing orchidaceous about you, and we'll also make it quite clear that there's to be no serious conversation until we've had lunch. Do you understand? The coffee stage will be soon enough. She nodded, flushing a little. It was good of you to ask me to lunch. Not at all. I like lunching with attractive young women, and for some reason her flush deepened. The hotel was situated on a hill, and there was a wonderful view over the palm-studded garden to the Bosporus spread out before them as they sipped their drinks. The Bosporus, dividing 2 continents, and linking 2 of the most brilliant seas in the world, cools Istanbul in the height of summer with its zephyr-like breezes. Today the sun was hot, and the striped awning above their heads afforded but little real protection from it. But even the distant shimmer of the Bosporus was cooling. Below them the harbor was so blue that it hurt the eyes, and the downward straggle of Istanbul, with its red roofs and color-washed houses, might have been a Mediterranean port. But for the Byzantine splendors that soared upwards into the slightly unreal atmosphere, so many minarets and cupolas that, from the sea, a first glimpse of Istanbul was like being afforded a glimpse into the peak period of the Ottoman Empire. It's a strange place, Istanbul, Villiers mused. The old and the new not merely marching side by side, but, the old is determined not to die, and the new is so very be determined that one shall not outpace the other. The new department stores where you can buy anything from a washing machine to the latest gramophone disc, and even a bikini, I've no doubt, if you looked for it. So much do the women of Turkey owe to Kemal Atatürk. Gay nodded. No doubt it will strike you as strange, she said, but although I've lived here for some time now, I haven't really seen very much of Istanbul. I've visited the Grand Bazaar, of course, and it's amazing how many things you can buy there. Furs, silks, jewelry, the most wonderful perfumes, and all under the same enormous roof. And I've visited other people's houses, but the things I sometimes thought I'd like to do, explore the narrow side streets, examine the wonderful architecture at close quarters, get to know some of the ordinary people, and even go shopping by myself. Well, those are the things I'm not allowed to do. Then today is quite an occasion. Not really. I said I was meeting a friend for lunch, and the sex of this friend was not questioned this time. She flushed brilliantly. I'm afraid I lied. I said it was a woman friend. Tut, tut, he exclaimed, but his smile suggested he was reproving a schoolgirl who had confessed to a misdemeanor that amused him. But I'm sure that lie didn't come easily, for you're not the type to enjoy intrigue, are you? And as for your meeting ordinary people, Well, you can hardly expect the ward of anyone like Orhan Bey to be permitted to do that. Bey's old-fashioned where his womenfolk are concerned, and although he can't insist on your wearing a yashmak, he can keep you segregated, particularly as he has plans for your future. Now, let's go into lunch, shall we? At first he thought she wasn't going to enjoy the lunch, or even display the faintest appetite for it. That remark about her future, as he recognized a moment too late, was unwise just then, but gradually, the relaxed atmosphere of the dining room, with its air conditioning, and its up-to-the-minute style of decor that was quite unreminiscent of the heavy sumptuousness of Orhan Bey's house, had their effect, and he could almost feel her take a deep breath and allow some of the taut anxiety to slip away from her. They talked of archaeology, and she discovered that it was the main reason why life for him had a savor that was quite unlike the normal zest for life. A little uncannily, when he talked of long-forgotten cities, ruins, excavations, his cool gray eyes glowed as if a light was lighted suddenly behind them. It was a light that banished the cynicism from his face, and there was a good deal of cynicism in it in repose, and made it come alive. Somehow, she gathered that he was only really happy when he was living, as he phrased it, on the dig. The eloquence of his speech caused her to see him against a background of burning desert and hot little tents, a string of baggage camels waiting to move on when the order was received. She saw him in the doorway of his tent, with the harsh white moonlight pouring over him and making any other form of illumination unnecessary, sorting the finds that had been unearthed that day, little figurines, semi-precious stones, pieces of pottery, even human bones. The absorption on his face was so complete that it was curiously disturbing, with all that loneliness surrounding him, and not one of his own kind near him. His wanderings had taken him to places as far afield as Petra in Jordan and the remains of the Aztec civilization in Mexico, and apparently he planned to go on wandering. He had just finished working in Syria, and his future plans were more or less fixed, but not quite fixed. He wouldn't discuss them. His face grew shut in and withdrawn when she tried to draw him out, and she saw in him an ascetic who could repel all attempts to discover what the human side of him thought about and desired above all else. Perhaps there was nothing he did desire apart from the endless delving into history, the preoccupation with dead things, but for him they were still alive. She could tell that. Women? He was the type of man who would have a deadly fascination for women, yet he was not married. She knew that quite definitely. Was there someone to whom he was, perhaps, engaged? You don't find it a lonely life, sometimes? She asked, when the meal was drawing to its close, and the coffee stage was very near. T. Wunley. He looked at her almost quizzically. You mean, wouldn't I like to settle down and start a family, and so on? Wouldn't I be happy with a wife? No, my dear, I wouldn't. Women and archaeology don't mix. At least, wives and archaeology don't mix. His look grew even more quizzical as he met and held her eyes, and she felt a strange confusion rushing up over her. But don't get the wrong ideas about me. I don't propose to marry, ever, but I'm not inhuman. I find your sex quite appealing at times. She felt as if the pink flush in her cheeks was like a pink stain, giving away the fact that she was very orthodox at heart, that she was very orthodox altogether, and that he had shocked and disturbed her, and, perhaps, disappointed her a little. Net biea. So he wasn't going to marry, ever, and the rigidness of his mouth, and the hard line of his jaw, meant that was a decision he had really come to. But it seemed a pity. It was a pity also that he thought, women, if they were agreeable, were for the light relief that was necessary sometimes, when one lived one's life with shadowy things that no longer had a vital spark in them, even if they were there to see, and feel, and enthuse over. They had their coffee served to them in the lounge, because it was cool there, and outside on the terraces the light was harsh. Villiers waited until Gay had taken a first sip at her coffee. Like him, she preferred the ordinary continental variety to the thick, sweet, Turkish coffee, to which, she was certain, she would never grow accustomed, just as she would never grow accustomed to living the life of a wealthy Turk's ward. Then he said abruptly, well, we start talking about you now, isn't that it? Gay set down her coffee cup very carefully, because her fingers had started to shake, and she asked him a question. Do you believe, Mr. Villiers, that I was you the truth last night? I believe that you believed you were telling me the truth. She made a little helpless gesture. But that isn't enough. I was speaking the truth. I am Gay Nicholson. Please, she implored. You've got to believe it. He avoided meeting her eyes. Miss Nicholson. Or perhaps I'd better say Miss Maitland. For the time being, This morning I seized the opportunity to have a word with the doctor who attend, TTI 9 British pounds, ed you after you were dismissed from hospital. He's by way of being a friend of mine, and I know he wouldn't say anything but what he believed to be the truth about you, and he's convinced that you are the base ward. He said you received an injury to your head when the crash took place, which would account for your present delusion about yourself, that it is just a delusion, and one day you yourself will be fully convinced that you are Cecile Maitland. Never, she said quietly. He lifted his eyes from his cigarette, and this time as he spoke he studied her almost broodingly. I also had a word with someone I know very well in the airline company's offices, and dropped into the British consulate. So far as they are concerned, there is no such person as Gay Nicholson. Her lower lip quivered slightly, and he saw her reach out for her handbag and search mechanically for a small, lace-edged handkerchief, with which she dabbed at her lips. And you believe that, too? Now, no, I don't know what to believe. He was frowning so much that his black brows seemed to meet in the middle. But I want you to try and cast your mind back as far as it will go. You say that you had dinner with someone, a man, on your last night in England, and that his final words to you were, "I'll meet you in Istanbul," or, "Meet me in Istanbul," or something of that sort. Can't you, if you try very hard, get a picture of this man? No, this time it was she who shook her head sadly. I can't. You don't know whether he was a friend or an acquaintance. Renee and some sort of business acquaintance. No, he was not a friend, she answered. His eyes, hard, suddenly, and grey as roof slates, seemed to bore into her face. Why should you be so certain of that? Just certain, Miss Maitland, he said sharply. You're not trying to put something across me, are you? You weren't having some sort of an affair in England, something you felt you had to run away from, and now that you're here, in order to be certain it doesn't catch up with you, trying to lose your identity. She was so plainly appalled by the suggestion that she just stared at him, and then, to his horror, her lips didn't merely quiver, the bottom one trembled so much that she had to catch it up between her even little white teeth to steady it. I don't know what you mean by an affair, she said, but it sounds hateful, particularly if you think I would try to lose my identity in order to escape the copyright consequences of it. I may not know who I am, at least, I do know, but I can't convince other people, but I don't have affairs. Probably they're the sort of thing you go in for. His hand reached out and covered one of hers. All at once he was comforting and consoling, as he had been the night before. I'm sorry, he said, but I just had to make sure. However, it shouldn't have been necessary, because you don't look the type, and you're very young, but you're also very lovely, if you'll forgive my saying so, and lovely girls get pestered sometimes. I don't think I've ever been pestered, in that high in my life, she said. He smiled. 7 at CNR. CAO must have been living amongst a lot of. He Waver approached, and he ordered fresh coffee. See this marriage plan that has been formed for you, he said, when the waiter had withdrawn. Do you knows the young man? Have you met him as yet? She shook her head. No, but he's the Bey's nephew, a young man called Kareem. He's a medical student in London, and he's flying out this weekend. Not in the least curious about him, Villiers asked, watching her covertly. Not when I know the reason why he's coming. To see what he thinks of me. Oh, nonsense. He's probably been working very hard for exams, and earned a break. In any case, I've met one or two of the Bey's nephews, and they've been rather charming young men. The Bey himself is handsome, as you'll agree. You don't want a rich, handsome Turkish husband. She merely looked at him with her big blue eyes, and he shook his head. I'll confess I find you unusual. Everything is dropped into your lap, and you want to return to obscurity, and, from what you have told me, poverty. Make quite certain you're not flying in the face of Providence, little one, before you listen to a plan I've formed for you. It may not work, but at least it would be a stopgap. Do you want to listen? Oh, yes, please, she said eagerly. His gray glance flickered over her whimsically. And afterwards, if you're a good girl, I'll drive you home through some of those narrow streets you talked about, and show you a little of the Istanbul you've not yet seen. Or would that involve you in complications? A PTE tape de yoya ya 1 x mrekizn 7. Bents. R. FXH. Equals repercussions, shall we say. When you oeiskriti don't mind repercussions, she answered. Some thing in her blue eyes as they hung upon his making copyright him wonder whether he wouldn't perhaps be wiser to put her into a taxi straight away, and tell her there was really nothing at all he could do for her. that compared with a great many other young women of her age she was fortunate, and her lot had fallen in pleasant paths, and in any case there was no real reason why he should interfere. "Don't you?" he said, and the cyanchinal gleam remained in his eyes. "But it might be wiser to avoid them, Mr. Villiers," she told him, surprising him a little. "I think the reason why I thrust myself upon your copyright notice as I did was because I felt quite certain you would never be afraid of repercussions. I don't think," she added, more slowly, "that you'd ever be seriously afraid of anything, would you?" "Yes," he answered, surprising her in her turn. "There are one or two things I'm afraid of, little one, but they're not the sort of things you can fight with your two hands, or even a sword and pistol. Now you'd copyright." Better listen to what PVE got to suggest. Chapter 4. That night Mrs. Valerie Lansdowne, known all over the world for her intrepidity as an explorer, and her vivacity as a writer, drove home to her flat in one of the older parts of Istanbul, and wondered why she was feeling very restless all at once. She supposed it was because she had been leading too quiet a life for too long, and also she was very much annoyed with Charles Villiers. She was so annoyed with him that she didn't quite know what to do about it. Her car passed beneath the arch into the Byzantine courtyard of the old palace where her flat was situated, just a tiny modern corner of anvoled and crumbling building, and she was glad, when Mustafa, her manservant, opened the door to her, to discover that there were no cards on the huge silver salver on the hall table. No cards meant no callers, and that was something to be thankful for. She was bored with callers, and, in fact, she was bored with people. "I take it that you've had a quiet afternoon, Mustafa," she said, as she handed over to him one or two raw parcels, and then tossed her gloves and handbag onto the hall table. "Mr. Villiers telephoned, madam," he informed her. As a matter of fact, he telephoned twice. She stamped her foot in childish fury because she had missed the call. "Get him at once, Mustafa, and let me know the instant you're through." "Very good, madam. While the servant telephoned, she paced up and down, an absurdly slender figure of a woman who had been face to face with tigers in their natural setting, and crossed a desert alone save for her native porters. That every movement she made had in it a certain tigerish grace was perhaps fitting, and her brilliant dark eyes could smolder occasionally behind her white eyelids. Just now they were alert and frustrated, and it was only when she turned to study herself in an exquisite Venetian mirror hanging on the wall that her expression softened and grew relaxed. It was as if the smooth perfection of her camellia pale face restored her equanimity, and when Mustafa handed over the ivory telephone receiver, her voice, as soon as she spoke, was soft and low and warm. "Charles, my dear, I'm so terribly sorry that stupid Mustafa didn't let you know I'd be back quite soon. I've been shopping, full stop. Just a few things to keep up my morale. The bazaar always fascinates me." She laughed softly as he said something that pleased her, and then her slim eyebrows drew together. "But of course I'll do something for you. You know very well that I do almost anything for you, Charles. I might as well say anything, because it's no more than the truth. Especially if you'll come and have dinner with me tonight as a reward. Will you?" Her peony red mouth lost some of the cold perfection of its outline, and honey took over the tones of her voice when he accepted the invitation. "Then tonight is something I shall look forward to. What is it you want me to do, my dear?" Once again her eyebrows puckered. "But Charles, aren't you being a little bit unwise? I haven't met Orhan Bey's English ward, but I think most people have heard of her. Her mother was one of those insipidly pretty creatures who get themselves linked up with men who like to dominate them, and the Bey undoubtedly dominated her. Oh, I think he was fond enough of her in his way. A few years ago he'd have shut her up in a harem, and seen that she never appeared without a yashmak, and even today the women folk of that household are rather guarded and cherished. I hear he has plans for this stepdaughter, his youngest nephew, Karim, a terribly good-looking boy, but a bit of a dark horse, somewhat a thorn in his uncle's side, too. I hate repeating rumors, but there was a mess, slightly unsavory, he got himself into not long ago." 99 What do you mean?" she asked, as Charles said something about that settling the matter. "Charles, you simply can't interfere in a matter of this kind. You've lived long enough in a country like this to know that it just isn't done. And as for the girl thinking she's someone else, well, that's nonsense. What is it they call it when someone receives a blow on the head, and they lose their memory? Amnesia. Lots of people suffer from it after a bad accident. Jay, want your permission to bring her to lunch tomorrow," Charles Villiers said decidedly. "And I also want you to ask her to stay with you for a few days. That can't cause a civil war, and it will give the poor kid a break. How old is she? Valerie Lansdowne inquired in a taut voice. QH. I don't know. Which, of course, was not true. In her early 20s. Very early 20s, I suppose. Could be copyright pretty. Fee. J. am not carried away by pretty young women, my dear, he returned, drily. But yes, she is pretty, and insipidly fair like her mother. She is fair. Yes, then, Charles, there's no doubt about her identity. But since you insist, you can bring her to lunch, and I'll also ask her to stay with me, if the Bey's permission can be obtained. We mustn't antagonize the Bey. I wasn't intending to do so. I'll ask his permission, and as we're planning to go off somewhere fairly soon, you won't saddle me with the girl for too long, will you? It wouldn't be fair to either of us, Charles, to you or me, I mean, wouldn't it? Charles said, and as she replaced the receiver on its rest, the camellia calm of her face had vanished. And just for an instant, as she stood there leaning up against the hall table, and tearing at her lower lip agitatedly, she looked every one of her 5 years. Her pallor was so noticeable that Mustafa, siesting the hall to the dining room, couldn't help sending her an inquiring glance, and her eyes flared at him. Mr. Villiers is coming to dinner, Mustafa, she said. Make sure that it's a good dinner, and that the table decorations are as I like them. Certainly, madam, Mustafa answered smoothly. And as he went on his way, his mistress looked down at the silver salver whereon no visiting cards rested and muttered angrily, Charles is impossible. He thinks he can get away with anything, but this is too much like the last straw. She bit her lip so hard that a tiny drop of blood spurted. And knew of the sphinxes of her teeth. JT is the last Cyril in her own room in Orhan Bey's commodious, luxurious house. Gay set down her own telephone receiver and turned to slip into the pale pink net dress that her own personal maid was holding ready for her. Gay, hugging to herself pleasant memories of her lunch that day, and the afternoon that followed it, was not relieved in her mind because Charles Villiers had contacted her to let her know that Mrs. Valerie Lansdowne was willing to come to her rescue. She had read more than one of Mrs. Lansdowne's books, and she was full of admiration for a woman, a widow, who, although intensely feminine if one could judge from her photographs, refused to include such a word as fear in her vocabulary. She braved lions and tigers, dined alone with savage chieftains, or there had been one occasion at least when she had been the only feminine guest at a banquet given by a savage chieftain, and was described in the glossy magazines as the loveliest female adventurer of our time. To Gay, unable to prove such an all-important thing as her own identity, appalled by the thought that she might never be able to do so, and that her real personality would be sunk forever in the personality of another, minus a passport, and without a country to claim her, the thought of a woman as all-powerful as she felt sure Mrs. Lansdowne must be coming to her aid, and willing to champion her, had all the comfort in the world. Mrs. Lansdowne would be clear-sighted and clear-thinking, and she would recognize the ring of truth when she heard it. Charles Villiers had said that he had known her for years, and that once she undertook to do something she was not easily put off. In fact, she almost, always saw it through, and he believed that a woman could be of greater assistance to Gay than he could just then. He did not know that Gay already looked upon him as a lifetime that had been flung to her, or one that she had snatched at, and that whatever Mrs. Lansdowne did for her, the credit would always be his. The little maid handed Gay a bracelet to slip on her wrist, and Gay did so mechanically, not even noticing that it was composed of rubies in an antique gold setting, and that it was one of a pair the Bey had presented to her very recently. The Bey was so generous that it was only when his gifts felt heavy on her wrists, or about her slender throat, that a feeling of repugnance shot through her, and she wished he was not nearly so lavish. Quite apart from anything else, lack of generosity would enable her to dislike him more than she did. For one could not really dislike a man as charming and courtly as the Bey. True, she sometimes wondered whether, beneath that suave and kindly exterior, he was as considerate of everyone else's feelings, particularly her own, as he always appeared. There were never any harsh words to servants, at least, not in her hearing, and he had many friends. He had a voice that was soothing and full of sympathy always, and in spite of graying hair he was very handsome still. She could understand Cecile Maitland's mother being happy married to him, for he was the sort of man who looked upon a woman as a fragile toy, and from all accounts Madame Orhan Bey had been both fragile and helpless. No doubt she had enjoyed being smothered by kindness. More than once it had occurred to Gay that such a personable man, still on the sunny side of 50, would undoubtedly wish to get married again, and it had also occurred to her when he first mentioned his nephew Kareem, that was the reason why he wanted to get her married when she went down to dinner with both ruby bracelets secure on her wrists, but only because the maid insisted they were meant to be worn as a pair. She was thinking with a dull kind of apprehension of Kareem. The little glow of comfort her day had brought to her seemed to vanish with the thought of him, and her first glimpse of the Bey's face when he welcomed her in the drawing room increased her unease. "You and I are to dine alone together tonight, my dear," he said, "and afterwards I am to join a party of my friends. There will be some bridge, and perhaps some music." He smiled down at her, after he had put a small cocktail glass into her hand. "But I will not press you to become one of us, although my hostess would be delighted if you could be so persuaded, because someone is due to arrive this evening who would be bitterly disappointed if you were not here." She could see his gold teeth as his smile expanded. "I am referring, my dear Gay, to Kareem. His aircraft is due in at Yashilkoi Airport in another hour, and he should be here within another half hour after that. There will be time for me to make you known to one another before I have to leave. SVTWA at copyright equals K cent VAT 9 ESA PENSC's FA PA EE. Chapter 5. But although they waited until a very late hour that night, and the Bey cancelled his evening engagement in order to be on hand when his nephew arrived, Kareem Abdul Anouk, his mother, it appeared, had married a Greek, did not put in an appearance before the clock struck 12, and then the Bey ordered Gay off to bed. She went with the feeling of one who had received a reprieve, although, as she told herself, no one could possibly order her to marry anyone against her will, not even in the present circumstances, and judging by his tardy appearance, or, rather, his deliberate non-appearance, since the car that had been sent to the airport to fetch him had returned with the information that the plane had landed, but Master Kareem plainly had other fish to fry, for he had dismissed it, and sent a message by the chauffeur that Hay would hire a taxi in due course. The man selected for her to marry had his own views on the subject, too. The Bey had tightened his lips on receipt of the message, although he had said nothing about the methods of modern young men, but it was that he was annoyed. Gay went to bed, and put Kareem right out of her mind while she thought about Charles Villiers, and his remote grey eyes. The last contented, conscious thought she had before she fell asleep was that she was meeting him again the following day. She must have slept heavily, and for her the previous day had been filled with so much unusual excitement that it was not, perhaps, surprising, and her maid, 7, allowed her to sleep late, so that when she went downstairs at last she fully expected to have the dining room to herself. As a matter of fact, she had completely forgotten about Kareem, and all her thoughts were on her meeting with Mrs. Valerie Lansdowne, and the lunch that had been arranged the previous day. She pushed open the dining room door carelessly, it never once crossing her mind that she would find the room occupied. The dining room in Orhan Bey's house was rather dim, and the light that entered through the heavily curtained windows was the green light from the garden. There was the reflection of green lawns and trailing vines in the silver on the sideboard, and the silver on the breakfast table had the same twilight shimmer playing over it. Orhan Bey lived like a wealthy Englishman in the latter part of the 19th century, and the room had a sumptuous Victorian opulence about it that was at variance with the modern additions that were simply to prove that he was keeping abreast of the times. Gay, wearing a thickly pleated skirt of corn-colored silk, and a little muslin blouse, with her silver-gilt hair tied back from her face with a corn-colored ribbon, seemed to bring a burst of sudden sunshine into the room. The man at the sideboard, helping himself from the various dishes with a marked lack of enthusiasm, looked up with a temporary lightening of his expression as she stood staring at him in astonishment. Well, he remarked, so we meet at last, little Cecile and I. He would have been almost startlingly good-looking, but for the lines of dissipation in his face, the slight sullenness at the corners of his mouth. His eyes were a brilliant hazel, his eyelashes incredibly long, his hair a rich brown full of bright mahogany tints. As he turned, TT lalite at AOSTFA SEPPE JETLAE il paterwiego ora. We fet ie away from the sideboard he moved with grace, and Gay thought instantly of a creature of the jungle, moving warily. Plus fav he surveyed her with a certain cautious admiration. So you are my uncle's choice of a wife for me. How very pleasant. If I was thinking of taking a wife, Jay think you know, she said, though why she should imagine that he did know she couldn't think just then, that I am not Cecile Maitland. 7 Her slim back was pressed to the door behind her, and for the first time for weeks she felt as if almost anything could happen, but even so his reply surprised her. As a matter of fact, I do, he admitted, and his teeth flashed very hard and wide as he smiled at her. Cecile wasn't nearly as pretty as you, and I shouldn't think she was half as intelligent. But then, of course, you must be a year or two older than she was. Gay caught him up quickly. Then she was aboard she could never bring herself to say, the aircraft that crashed, because even yet she couldn't properly take it in that she was the sole survivor of that disaster. It seemed too fantastic that she alone should have been preserved for some purpose, when even members of the crew were lost. Karim nodded. Oh, yes, she was aboard. Don't ask me how it happened that your real name, that is, was apparently never down on the passenger list, and that you were the odd man out. You were lucky to escape, but why you escaped, and why you were not officially amongst the rest of the passengers, is your secret, not mine. Cecile was too young to die, but you seem to be filling her shoes very satisfactorily. Gay moistened her lips. I can't remember anything. I know nothing. He shrugged his shoulders slightly, and his cool hazel look was skeptical. Except that you are not Cecile. You do know that. She inclined her head slightly. Everything else is a fog. Too bad, he murmured. He moved to the breakfast table. I wonder whether you'd like to pour me out some coffee? I find the contents of those dishes on the sideboard revolting after the party I attended last night. It was, in a sense, a welcome home party, given by a few friends of mine, although my uncle, of course, knows nothing at all about it. He expected me to come straight here and make your acquaintance. His eyes narrowed as he studied her. Perhaps if I'd known you were so unlike Cecile I might have hastened to do that very thing. Gay's hands trembled as she poured his coffee, but although she poured a cup for herself, she couldn't drink it. She felt that he was the one person who was in a position to clear away all the last remnants of the fog that surrounded the last 6 months of her life. And, although something about him repelled her, in spite of his almost unbelievable good looks, she knew that she would have to appeal to him if necessary. Mr. Anouk, she began. Oh, come now, he exclaimed, offering her a cigarette, which she refused. We might as well start off as Karim. What is your real name? James Gay Nicholson. You seem very sure of that, but apparently a lot of people are not. However, all that is beside the point. I think Gay is a very attractive name. I'm beginning to wish I hadn't wasted yesterday evening. Aetam eaten pou urengi. Was boiren rrrrrlsae Saint Lee may please. Karim, she begged. Eos instantly his lustrous eyes grew soft and caressing. He bent towards her. Go on, little one. If there is anything you wish me to do, I will do it. That is to say, anything within reason. But I will not tell my uncle you are not Cecile Maitland. At least, not yet. And I will not let him into the secret of Cecile's marriage with a friend of mine just before she left England. In fact, it was to let him know that she was married that she left England. And also of course to make it clear to him that any plans he was nursing where she and I were concerned were doomed to come to nothing. But Gay's eyes flew open because of a thought. You mean that Cecile Maitland was no longer Cecile Maitland, either? That she had exchanged her name for another, which could, of course, now be yours. He regarded her with a bright sparkle of intrigue in his eyes this time. The situation is getting a little out of hand, isn't it? Or there's always the possibility that it could do so. Officially you're Cecile Maitland, and if Cecile's husband liked to turn up suddenly, and swear to it that he saw no difference between you and the girl he married, he sat back, and for a second or so she had the feeling that his eyes were gloating over her. Well, you do see what I mean. No, 99 all at once she felt that this was carrying an absolute ludicrous situation too far, and all at once she felt extraordinarily calm. Here was someone who knew she was not Cecile Maitland, and that was something, that was indeed something. All she had to do was to get him to admit it, and then she would be free of TRWN territor, her gilded cage. I think you know you are talking a lot of nonsense, she said, quite crisply. In time, who and what I am is bound to become common knowledge, even without your assistance. But with your assistance it can become common knowledge immediately, and I can't believe you when you pretend that you would try to deceive your uncle, for absolutely no purpose, over anything as important as this. To you, my dear, he reminded her, to you, who are apparently anxious to establish your identity, this is something that is of overwhelming importance. But to me it is something that has to be considered very carefully. There may be aspects to a situation like this that could ultimately be of benefit to myself. And at this moment, I don't mind confessing to you, I am not in high favor with my uncle. I look like failing in my finals. In fact, I think it's pretty certain that I will and to upset a favorite scheme of his at a moment so extremely unpropitious would be like flying in the face of Providence. You must give me time. Nonsense. She stood up. You must come with me now to your uncle. He is usually in his study at this hour in the morning, and we will go and see him together. But he shook his head. I refuse to be rushed. I repeat that you will have to give me time. Then I will go and see him alone, and tell him what he asked, with infuriating placidity, that I am, Hall am. Her slim white throat worked a little, because although things were so much clearer, they were still not clear enough. Her own mind still retained a portion of a blank, and tested on matters. OEAHLPEOBNIEE high fees. PAED fear wheeled relating to her own past she would still not be able to return entirely satisfactory answers. Therefore it was essential that Karim should support her. Your uncle is a reasonable man. He will listen to me. He hasn't listened to you so far, has he? He reminded her smoothly. No, my enchanting golden-headed one. And I've seen wedding rings of the same pale gold as that hair of yours. You will have to be just patient, and wait until I have thought the matter out. If I decide that I would like to acquire a few responsibilities, such as a home, and a wife. Gay stood very still and stared at him. You forget, she reminded him in her turn, very steadily, that Cecile Maitland, if she were alive now, would already have a husband. Exactly, he murmured, but I haven't told you yet. Have I the name of that husband? She went on staring at him. She felt like a very small and helpless insect being hypnotized by a snake, and only her will prevented hypnotism from being complete. Feeling a little sick inside, and oddly shaken, at last she turned away. No, and I'm not inquiring, she said, because it's no concern of mine, but she felt that she needed some strength to get back to her room and prepare for her lunch with Valerie Lansdowne. Valerie Lansdowne. The name had a rock-like feeling of comfort. I've a luncheon appointment, she said stiffly. I'll have to go now. Anyone I know? I wonder, he murmured. My uncle's friends are mostly mine when I'm in Istanbul. It's a Mrs. Lansdowne. She heard herself answering mechanically. Anne. A man. Of course. His voice held mockery. Two women don't normally lunch together for the pleasure of Rome and Valerie isn't the type who would be able to endure it. As she stared at him in surprise she was not able to conceal. He laughed gratingly. The whole world knows something, at least, of Mrs. Lansdowne's exploits. She writes books very entertainingly, but I think that must be the brave man who is making up the third member of your party hooting for you in the lane. I think you'll find that his car is parked outside the side entrance, and that wouldn't please my uncle. You should get your escorts to collect you at the front of the house. Gay had rushed so much that she was almost painfully breathless when she subsided on the front seat of Charles Villiers's car. She was also looking so markedly pale that he felt he had to comment on it. All right, he asked, as he slid in his gears. She nodded, swallowing rather hard. Yes, I'm all right. I'm afraid I was late in getting up this morning, and I had to rush things. She had collected the jacket that went with the yellow silk skirt, and she looked very slim and golden. But her hands were fastened almost feverishly about her snakeskin bag, and although she wore gloves he knew that the knuckles were white. He nodded. It's a bad habit to sleep late in the mornings. Don't normally. I never used to. Charles smiled faintly. Probably in the past you didn't have much opportunity, he remarked. Then he explained. I thought I'd better pick you up at the side door. Until you and Valerie have had a chance to size one another up I think it's wisest to keep the bay in ignorance of this little luncheon date. INIYFHSH. Say for F. She looked suddenly apprehensive. You don't think Mrs. Lansdowne will resent being asked to concern herself with my affairs, do you? She asked, and then more slowly. You do Fook she'll believe me, he replied to the latter part of her question, without actually committing himself about the first. Valerie is immensely shrewd. She's used to summing people up, and it's pretty casks that you're not attempting to deceive anyone. You mean that the only person I may be debebned is myself? He shrugged slightly. It's within the realm of possibility, isn't it? No, she answered, with unexpected firmness. It isn't. Not any longer. He risked removing his eyes from the road ahead to look at her for an instant. Karim has arrived, she explained, her fingers tightening on the gold clasp of her handbag. And he knows I am not Cecile. He puckered up his lips in a soundless whistle. In that case your identity is more or less established. No, it isn't as simple as that. Her voice sounded tight, like a piece of stretched wire, and he wished she wasn't so pale. May I have a talk with you after we've seen Mrs. Lansdowne? Of course. But if you want Valerie to help, you'll have to put all your cards on the table. he reminded her. She nodded mutely. She thought, two men who allow the name Valerie to pass their lips with so much ease. The ease of long practice. Yet Karim was several years younger than Charles, and he had been studying for some time in England. When they reached Mrs. Lansdowne's flat, she was waiting for them in her long, cool lounge, attractive with contemporary furniture. Having made her acquaintance, and seen how well suited she was to a background of somewhat bizarre hangings, ultra-modern settees and deep armchairs and unorthodox floral arrangements, Gay knew she would never be able to visualize her against anything older or mellower. The beige solid Victorian house would have stifled her, and no one but a modern dressmaker could have done justice to the wiry grace of her figure. There was no doubt about it. She ain't look at her very best in riding breeches and high, polished riding boots, with the slender column of her ivory throat revealed to its delicate base by the rolled-back collar of a silk shirt blouse. She was smoking a cigarette in a long jade holder when they were admitted by Mustafa, and Gay realized it was not an affectation. She was the type who would never stoop to affectations, and her sheath-like black skirt and transparent blouse of flame-colored chiffon were not meant to be particularly striking, either. They were simply a reflection of her personality, and it was a personality that reached out and gripped a stranger by the throat. "So this is Gay," she said. She stood looking down into Gay's face with her night dark eyes. She was several inches taller than the younger woman, and this gave her, from the first, an advantage over one who was already grappling with several other disadvantages. "I'm not going to call you Cecile, because that, apparently, is not your name, and it would be too formal to call you either Miss Maitland or Miss Nicole 47-4. Re-a-a-a in Allah Sage Hidayam Arsaad San. Now, sit down. Bad tell Mustafa what you would like to drink." Gay sat down, and Charles came to her support. "Give her a lime juice, Mustafa," he said smiling. Mrs. Lansdowne appeared only mildly surprised. "Well, that's pretty innocuous, and at least you seem to know her tastes, Charles," she remarked. Until lunch was served, the conversation ranged over a variety of subjects that had nothing whatever to do with Gay's personal problem, and because she was feeling more tensed up than she had done the previous day alone with Charles, Gay was grateful for this. Mrs. Lansdowne was something of a surprise to her, and yet, she supposed, she ought not to have been. She was cool and brittle as a blown glass vase, the sort in which some deep pink oleanders were massed against a silvery net curtain, and in spite of the dark depths in her eyes, Gay could sense no warmth in her, no warmth of any kind, and this made her heart sink by degrees. Lunch was served in a little midnight blue and pearl gray dining room, and like the other main room of the flat, it contained no souvenirs or trophies of Mrs. Lansdowne's exploits. If Gay had expected elephant's tusks, and at least one tiger skin on the floor, she was disappointed, and she was even vaguely perturbed by the excessive femininity of her surroundings. Mustafa, who was cook as well as manservant, served a typically Turkish lunch. It concluded with dishes of grapes, sliced watermelon, and the usual Turkish coffee. They took their coffee round a gleaming brass-topped table in the lounge, and from the window Gay could see beyond the stone balcony outside and into the courtyard of the old Byzantine palace. A great walnut tree overhung one of the walls, and the shadows Booksy, Fortea, BFPIND, made the courtyard very pleasant. It was very quiet. In this tucked-away spot, Gay could imagine Mrs. Lansdowne sitting on her balcony at night and thinking over all the adventures of her lifetime while she smoked a cigarette in her long holder and looked downwards into that peaceful enclosed space where harem ladies had once been carried in a litter. How very different today, with Mrs. Lansdowne herself the absolute epitome of modern freedom for women. Emancipation that could surely not go much further. Her voice was clear as a bell, but well modulated at the same time, and she discussed with Charles the new book she was hoping to begin on very soon, if other plans that were not yet crystallized didn't interfere with it. Here she looked at him, under her long, sweeping eyelashes, and Gay couldn't help but be aware of the spark of something that wasn't amusement in his eyes as he looked back at her. It was just as if she was deliberately tempting him with something that she didn't mention, and part of him rose to the bait with an eagerness that the other part didn't approve of, and the glint of appreciation in his gray eyes was actually something more than appreciation. And Valerie Lansdowne developed a soft, enticing smile at the corners of her lips. Charles J. there in his chair, looking very masculine, intensely masculine in such a feminine room, and the slightly feline grace of his own body was emphasized by the curious skill of his tailor. He had none of the lush good looks of Karim Anouk, but he was dangerously attractive. Gay felt as if something at the very bottom of her heart stirred as she looked at him, and she warned Hira 6 Ada, WY49, self that dangerously attractive should be a warning in itself. And then she caught her hostess's eyes on her, watchful, brooding, curious all at once, and she was not surprised when scarlet-tipped fingers extracted the remains of a cigarette from the jade holder, and Valerie Lansdowne leaned towards her and said, as if she had suddenly decided that the moment was ripe, I thought you and I would have a little talk, my dear, somewhere where Charles can't overhear all that we've got to say to one another. It's probably embarrassing for you to discuss your present situation, and in any case Charles knows all the details, so we'll have a heart-to-heart in my room, shall we? She rose sinuously, and her eyes were smiling, but they were also compelling. Gay had never felt so silently compelled in her life. Full stop. Come along, my dear. She started to lead the way, and then smiled over her shoulder, a very different sort of smile, at the man. Help yourself to coffee, Charles, and another drink if you fancy it. We won't be long, but I feel Gay and I should get to know one another without any disturbing outside influences, and she sent him a particularly meaning smile this time.